By 4:30 every weekday morning, Clint Caldwell had one hand on a thermos and the other on the weather radio dial, listening to a flat mechanical voice read wind chill and lake effect warnings like scripture. If the voice said -20 with gusts, Clint nodded and packed an extra pair of gloves. If it said freezing rain in the interior, he mentally crossed out a cut block and rerouted the day before his coffee cooled. He trusted forecasts more than opinions, steel over talk, and numbers over nerves. His place sat outside Munising, where the county road narrowed to 2 tracks and a plow berm, a low house tucked between black spruce and the skeletal stems of poplar. In summer, it looked temporary, like a hunting camp somebody forgot to leave. In winter, with snow shoulder high against the garage and smoke rising from the chimney, it looked welded to the earth. Tara called it the box. Clint called it paid for. He worked timber weekdays in the Upper Peninsula, mostly cedar and spruce, the kind of stands that swallowed sound and equipment alike. On good days, he ran the feller buncher through marked lanes, while the machine chewed and stacked with hydraulic patience. On bad days, the machine bellied out in powder or slush pockets over old swamp, and Clint was out there on snowshoes with a saw, limbing by hand until his shoulders burned and his beard frosted white. Either way, he liked the rhythm. Engine whine, pause, crack, fall, measure, move. Trees didn't lie. Weight limits on bridges didn't care how tired you were. Ice thickness didn't care about confidence. He met Marv at the landing most mornings, both of them breathing steam into headlamps while they checked chain tension and fuel. Marv was 10 years older, thick through the middle, good with a PV, bad with mornings. "You ever sleep?" Marv asked one morning as Clint backed the trailer in without touching the ruts. "Sometimes on Sundays," Clint said. "Must be nice." "It isn't, means I'm sick." By first light they were cutting. By late afternoon they were driving out with frozen mud packed into wheel wells like concrete, each man quiet in the way people get when they've spent all day around engines and wind. Weekends were for ice. Clint dragged a portable shack onto inland lakes before dawn, drilling grids, setting tip-ups, watching his sonar like a second heartbeat. He liked the small disciplines. Skimmer in left pocket, pliers right, bait in insulated bucket. Check line every 15 minutes, no matter how tempting it was to sit by the heater and drift. He could read pressure ridges and old refrozen cracks, the way other people read faces. A bent cattail frozen into ice told him where current ran. A dusting pattern told him where wind had stripped thin spots. Tooth marks and tracks told him who'd passed and whether they were hungry. Tara tolerated all of it with affectionate exasperation. She taught second grade in Munising and liked warm houses, open curtains, and people nearby. Clint liked cold, closed doors, and enough distance to hear weather coming. Most evenings they met in the middle. Spaghetti on Tuesdays, game highlights on low volume. Her papers spread across the kitchen table while he cleaned reels in the garage under a hanging bulb. "You own more tackle than furniture," she called one night, leaning in the doorway in wool socks. "Tackle catches fish," he said, threading new line through a guide. "So does luck." "Luck is just what people call preparation when they don't want to admit they were lazy," she laughed. "You gonna say that to my students?" "No, I like being alive." They weren't dramatic people. No slam doors, no midnight ultimatums. They had a practical love built out of replaced furnace filters, split grocery lists, and his quiet habit of scraping snow off her windshield before she had to leave. Clint had spent most of his life where routine was survival. Routine had rewarded him. Then, late in January, routine began coming apart in tiny places. The first thing he noticed was what he didn't hear. Driving into a cut before dawn, he cut the truck engine and sat for a second in the dark as he always did, listening before stepping out. Usually there'd be chickadees ticking from tamarack, maybe a raven arguing with nobody, maybe the faint yips of coyotes swapping shifts at dusk or dawn. That morning there was nothing. Not quiet like early morning, quiet like insulation, thick and unnatural, as if snow had swallowed every voice in the trees. He stood with his lunch pail and waited. Nothing. At the landing, Marv was fighting with a frozen latch. "Dead batteries in your ears?" Clint asked. "You hear anything in there?" Marv looked up. "Hear you whining? That count?" "No birds." Marv shrugged. "Cold snap, they're tucked up." It was a reasonable answer, and Clint took it. But over the next week, he started seeing absences where signs should have been. No fox prints crossing the access road. No rabbit tracks along the alder edge where he usually saw a dozen by noon. Even old deer runs looked abandoned, crusted over and undisturbed. The thaw-freeze crust could be hiding details, he figured. Logging pressure had probably pushed wildlife deeper. He came up with a lot of things because each thing alone made sense. On Saturday, he went to scout a lake east of town for lake trout. Wind drove loose snow over the ice in long, transparent sheets that looked like smoke. He set up in 15 feet, dropped camera and sonar, and watched bait clouds pulse in green and yellow beneath him. For half an hour, fish behaved exactly as expected, rising, checking, fading off. Then all at once, the bait marks dropped hard to bottom and scattered like someone had kicked an ant hill. His tip-ups, which had been tripping every 20 minutes the weekend before, went dead. Dead. Not a nibble, not a lazy look. He changed lures, moved 20 yards, checked knot, checked depth, checked everything twice. Nothing. Barometric pressure probably, front coming through. Back at the bait shop in town, a narrow cinder block place that always smelled like wax worms and coffee gone stale. Old Ronnie was topping off minnow tanks. "How's action?" Ronnie asked without looking up. "Fish got religion," Clint said. "Won't touch anything." Ronnie snorted. "You and everybody else. Woods are holding their breath this year." Clint gave him a look. "You start writing poetry?" "I'm serious. Trappers ain't seeing sign. Guys out by Chatham say even coyotes quit singing. Strange winter." "Cold winter." Ronnie lifted a shoulder. "Maybe." On the way home, Clint laughed at the phrase, holding their breath, and repeated it to Tara like a joke while she stirred venison chili. "Ronnie finally snapped," Clint said. "Says the woods are dramatic now." Tara smiled. "You spend enough time alone, trees start talking." "Trees have better sense than people." "Mm-hmm. You're reading those hunting forums again at midnight, aren't you?" He didn't answer. She took that as yes and pointed her spoon at him. "That stuff gets in your head, Clint. Every weird track is a monster. Every noise is a conspiracy." "I know what's normal. I know you do. I'm saying don't borrow trouble." He kissed her forehead and changed the subject. Midweek, hauling fuel cans into a back block, he found something that didn't fit any easy explanation. Moose tracks came up from a cedar lowland, broad and deep, each print crisp in wind-packed snow. The stride was long and steady, no stumble, no blood, no panic. The tracks climbed a little ridge where snow had blown almost bare, and stopped. Not faded, not drifted out. stopped. One full print, then nothing. No turn, no bound marks, no drag, no hole where crust collapsed. Just an open sweep of hard snow with black spruce shadows stretching across it. Clint stood there too long, scanning for continuation, circling wider and wider until he was 50 yards offline. Nothing. Probably hit frozen ground and you lost it, Marv said when Clint mentioned it at lunch. On powder over crust? For 50 yards? Marv chewed, shrugged. Wind does weird stuff. Again, reasonable. Again, Clint filed it away with the other pieces and kept moving. By the week they planned the overnight camp and fish run, the unease had gone from odd to persistent. The trip was supposed to be simple. Clint, Marv, and Eli. Marv's girlfriend's kid, 18, eager and underdressed for everything. Hauling one heated canvas tent onto a backcountry lake. Fishing dusk and dawn. Bunking one night. Heading out. Clint had done harder trips in worse weather. Still, he kept checking gear as if repetition could smooth the feeling under his ribs. Eli bounced around the garage while Clint sorted fuel bottles. You think we'll hit pike or just trout? Eli asked. Both if you stop stomping around like a moose, Clint said. Eli grinned. I'm quiet. You're a lot of things. Marv came in carrying the folded canvas tent over one shoulder. Kid says he's bringing a Bluetooth speaker. Clint looked up sharply. No. Thought so. Tara appeared at the mudroom door with 3 knit hats in her hands. I don't care how macho this expedition is. You wear these and take the emergency blanket. Clint accepted the hats, one by one. Yes, ma'am. She watched him a second longer than usual. You okay? Fine. Fine like fine, or fine like I bought 3 extra batteries and didn't tell anyone? He gave a half smile. Second one. That night he woke at 2 a.m. without knowing why. Lay still and listened to wind drag snow off the roof and dry whispers. No coyotes, no owls, no distant barking dog from the next property over. Just furnace tick and his own pulse. Winter nights got like that sometimes, he reminded himself. Go back to sleep. On Friday he took a scouting run to the lake they planned to camp on, wanting to check ice and trail conditions before hauling the sled. He brought his dog Boon, a shepherd mix that usually launched from the truck the second Clint cracked the door. Boon didn't move. Come on, Clint said, patting his leg. The dog pressed farther into the footwell, ears flat, eyes fixed past Clint toward the tree line. Not stubborn. Afraid. Clint had seen Boon square up on porcupines, charge black bears at the edge of camp, bark down snowmobiles twice his size. He had never seen him shake. It's a lake, not a dentist office, Clint muttered, trying lightness. He clipped the leash and coaxed. Boon planted all 4 feet and whined low in his throat, then twisted free and jumped back into the cab. Clint stood with the leash in his hand, feeling foolish for the way the back of his neck had gone tight. Dogs had bad days. Maybe his paw was sore. Maybe road salt. He checked all 4 pads. Nothing. He left Boon in the truck and walked down the marked trail alone, snow squeaking under insulated boots. The lake opened ahead in a pale sheet under a lead sky, ringed by jack pine and low rock outcrops, glazed with wind ice. He drilled 2 test holes near shore. Good thickness. He flagged a safe route with short orange stakes and turned to head back. Halfway to the truck, he realized he was hearing something in step with him from inside the trees. One heavy crunch, then silence, then another after his next 3 steps. Not the skittering hop of a hare, not the light patter of fox. Weight, measured, deliberate. He stopped. The sound stopped. He started. 3 steps later. Crunch. Clint turned toward the timber. Nothing but trunks and shadow, alder whips bent under rime, snow hanging from boughs and thick white pillows. No movement, no bird flush. He forced a laugh into the air like he was proving something to himself. Big mystery squirrel. No answer, of course. He kept walking, a little faster, not running, refusing to run. At the truck, Boon was standing on the seat, hackles up, nose pressed to the rear window. He wasn't barking. He was tracking something behind Clint with small, rigid head movements. Clint loaded the auger and looked down to cinch a strap, and that was when he saw the print beside his own boot track at the edge of the packed trail. It was fresh enough that tiny crystals still glittered loose at the rim. Bigger than his spread hand. Deep. 5 long toe marks splayed forward, not a hoof, not a paw he recognized. The front 2 impressions angled like gripping fingers. The stride line continued into the trees, parallel to his route, matching him for at least 20 yards, before vanishing into wind-hardened crust. He crouched for a better look and smelled something rank and metallic, like wet fur and old blood under cold air. From somewhere in the timber came a single low exhale, close enough that he felt it more than heard it. Clint stood slowly, got in the truck, locked the doors, and drove without turning on the radio. He pulled into his driveway too fast, tires biting the packed snow and fishtailing a little before straightening. The porch light washed the berm and garage door in weak yellow. Boon stayed in the cab even after Clint shut the engine off, chest pumping, eyes still fixed on the tree line behind the house. Tara opened the front door before he made the porch. "You're early." "Yeah." He stomped his boots, buying a second. Trail's fine, ice is good. She looked past him toward the truck. "Why's Boon still in there?" "He's being weird." "Because?" Clint set his auger case against the wall harder than he meant to. "I don't know." He wouldn't get out. Her expression changed in that small, practiced way teachers had when kids lied badly. "What happened?" He told her about the footsteps first, because footprints sounded crazier when he said them out loud. Then he told her about the track anyway. He kept his tone clipped and technical, the way he talked at work after a near miss. Dimensions, depth, stride line, wind direction. Facts were safer than feelings. Tara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she folded her arms against the cold draft and said, "Could it be a bear? In January, they do wake up sometimes. Not and pace me for 20 yards. Dog? No dog track I've ever seen. Person? Maybe." He latched onto that one even as he said it. Could have been someone cutting through. Weird boot. Homemade snowshoe. Then that's what it was. She stepped aside and nudged the door wider. "Come inside, you're shaking." He hadn't realized he was. In the kitchen, he spread a napkin and drew what he'd seen with a ballpoint pen. 5 long marks and a palm pad, too wide for wolf, too narrow for snowshoe. Tara watched him sketch, and then held up her own hand over the drawing. "Could be melted edges," she said gently. "Prints do that." Edges were sharp. Could still be distorted. Could, he said, though he didn't believe it. After dinner, he went to the garage and did what he always did when something felt off. Maintenance. He sharpened chains that didn't need sharpening, topped fuel, repacked the tent stove kit, checked headlamp batteries with a tester he trusted more than his own nerves. Between tasks, he pulled up wildlife track charts on his phone and zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. black bear hindfoot, river otter bound, wolverine and crust, lynx and melt, domestic dog with toe spread. Nothing matched cleanly. Some came close in one feature and failed in two others. He found one photo from Alaska of a big bear print softened by thaw that looked almost right until he saw scale and terrain and told himself to stop doom scrolling at midnight like Tara accused him of doing. At 8:40, he texted Marv a photo of the napkin sketch. "You ever seen this?" The reply came 3 minutes later. "Looks like you stepped on your own print and got scared." Clint stared at it, thumb hovering. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on. "Saw it beside mine." "Fresh," Marv sent back. "Then probably a dog with ice balls in the fur. Relax, relax." Clint set the phone face down and listened to the heater click on. He could still smell that metallic rankness if he thought about it too hard. The next morning, he took a longer route to the landing and stopped at Ronnie's bait shop while it was still dim outside. Ronnie was filling coffee from a machine with a cracked lid. "You look like hammered hell," Ronnie said. "Question for you." Clint pulled out his phone, showed the sketch, and then a blurry photo he'd managed to snap from the truck before leaving the trailhead. It was bad. Angle wrong, light flat. But the depth was obvious. Ronnie squinted. "That from around here?" "Yesterday." "Huh." Ronnie rubbed his jaw. Too long for wolf. Too open for cat, not Fisher, not Wolverine. "Bear?" "Maybe if it stepped funny. Old injury, ice packed in, who knows? It tracked me in timber." "Everything tracks everything in timber." Clint didn't smile. "You heard of anyone losing dogs?" Ronnie shook his head. "Coyotes took 2 chickens off M94 last week, that's all I got." "Anybody talk about big sign, weird sign?" Ronnie gave him a look over the coffee cup. "You really worked up about this." "Just asking." "You want official, call DNR and let them tell you it's nothing. You want unofficial?" He lowered his voice like the minnow tanks might rat him out. "One trapper north of Shingleton said something came through his line and didn't take bait, just broke 2 sets and moved on. Could have been a moose. Could have been kids. Could have been him needing glasses. Winter makes stories." At the landing, Clint asked 2 other guys, phrasing it casual. "Anybody seen bear sign awake midwinter? Anybody seen odd canine tracks near the back lakes?" He got shrugs, jokes, and one story about a neighbor's Great Dane escaping and chasing snowmobiles 3 years ago. By noon, he had assembled a pile of explanations that each almost worked. Bear not denned right, big feral dog, wolf with deformity, someone in gloves and custom snowshoes trying to scare people. Every idea solved one piece and broke another. Around lunch, Marv finally looked up from his thermos and said, "You still coming tomorrow, or are you going to hold Boon's paw at home?" "We're going." "There you go. Fresh air cures internet brain." Clint snapped his container closed. "I don't have internet brain." Marv smirked, then quit acting like every twig snap is Bigfoot. Eli arrived that afternoon to help load sleds and looked too excited to feel cold. "I tied leaders last night," he announced. "Like 30 of them." "Good," Clint said. "You'll lose 29 in brush." Eli laughed and started stacking gear in the wrong order. Clint restacked it without comment. Tent bundle low, stove box centered, fuel upright and strapped, emergency kit accessible, flare gun in top pocket, extra lithium cells sealed. He added one item he hadn't planned on bringing: a compact game camera from his deer setup, mostly because he wanted evidence of something ordinary. A bear's shoulder, a wandering dog, a trespasser's parka, anything that could be named. Before they left, Tara caught him at the truck and zipped his collar all the way up like he was still 18. You do not have to go just because you said you would. Trips planned. Plans can change. 3 guys, 1 heated tent, marked route, radios, truck trail staked. It's fine. He heard how rehearsed it sounded. She touched his wrist. Then call me when you set camp. I will. You promise? Promise. The lake took them longer than expected. New drift had swallowed the old approach, and they had to break trail in shifts, snowshoes punching through crust to knee depth in spots. Eli talked through all of it. Hockey, school, lure colors, a girl in his history class, filling silence the way younger people did when quiet made them nervous. Marv grunted at intervals, breath smoking, sled harness squeaking. By the time they reached the flagged line Clint had put in the day before, twilight had gone blue and flat. The lake stretched out empty, a sheet of dull metal with pressure ridges faint under wind-blown snow. No tracks crossed it. None. Not fox, not rabbit, not bird scratch at the edge. Just their 3 sets marching in. Kinda dead out here, Eli said, finally noticing. Winter, Marv said. They set camp 50 yards off the main ridge where the ice tested thick and the shore timber gave partial windbreak. Clint and Marv raised the canvas tent while Eli gathered deadfall from the fringe for a small outside fire. The tent went up solid, center pole seated, guy lines tight, stovepipe clear. Familiar steps, practiced hands. Clint felt his pulse settle for the first time in 24 hours. He set the game camera on a jack pine facing camp, angled to catch anything crossing from the tree line. When Eli asked why, Clint said, "Coyote's been nosing gear at camps lately," and Eli accepted it. They fished the last of daylight, drilled a 6-hole line, and marked fish moving low but sluggish. One small laker hit Eli's jig and shook free at the hole. After full dark, they retreated to the tent, boots steaming near the stove, gloves hung from a line overhead. The canvas snapped softly in gusts. Stove metal pinged. They ate reheated venison and crackers and listened to the little radio spit static between weather bands. At 9:17, the first crunch came. Heavy. Distinct. Not near enough to be accidental snow settling. Not light enough for fox. 1 step, pause, another step, slow and measured in the dark outside the tent wall. Eli froze with a spoon halfway to his mouth. You hear that? Yep, Marv said, eyes on Clint. Another crunch, this one behind them near the sleds. Clint kept his voice even. Probably a bear woke up hungry. Marv snorted. In this cold? Happens. Not like that. The steps continued, not rushing, not sneaking, just circling at a steady pace around the tent. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Always just outside where the firelight faded into black. Eli whispered, "Should we yell?" Clint grabbed the metal pot and smacked it with a spoon. "Hey, move along." The steps stopped for maybe 10 seconds, then resumed. Same pace, slightly farther out, completing the ring. "See?" Clint said. "Curious, not committed." Committed to what? Eli asked too fast. Anything. He didn't believe his own answer, but saying it kept Eli from spiraling. They fed the outside coals and sealed the flap. Clint checked the flare gun, then set it near his sleeping bag where he could grab it without searching. Marv noticed and said nothing. By 11 o'clock, the footsteps had come and gone in intervals, always returning. Never a sniff at the canvas, never a paw swipe, never a charge. Just that slow orbit, like something pacing a fence line it meant to test later. Eli tried to joke and failed. Maybe it's a raccoon with body dysmorphia. Marv muttered. Raccoon the size of a Buick. Clint told them both to rack out and preserve heat. We leave at first light if it keeps up. Thought it was a bear, Marv said. It can be both things. What does that even mean? It means sleep while you can. No one really slept. At 1:12 a.m., Clint checked his watch by headlamp and heard the crunch stop directly in front of the tent entrance. He held up a hand for silence. Eli's breath went shallow. Marv shifted to one knee. Clint eased forward, thumb and forefinger pinching the zipper pull, and opened the flap 2 inches. Night air knifed in, smelling like cold iron and distant spruce smoke from their coals. He clicked his headlamp once, a narrow beam low across the snow. 2 reflections stared back from maybe 30 yards out, low to the ground and set wider than coyote eyes. Amber white in the light, steady. Then, as he watched, another pair appeared above them, higher, at about chest level on a standing man farther apart still. The lower pair blinked out first like someone had shut one set of lights off. The upper pair stayed fixed on him. Clint forgot to breathe. The eyes did not bob as they moved. They glided left across the dark edge of camp while, a half-second later, he heard the corresponding crunch of steps in crust. Not the vertical rise and fall of a deer gait. Not the quick snap of a canine trot. Smooth lateral drift with heavy footfalls that sounded wrong for the motion. He widened the gap another fraction and caught a hint of bulk behind the reflections. Only suggestion, no shape. Then the eyes stopped again, too high and too far apart to fit anything his brain offered him. Bear standing? Maybe. But bears swayed, huffed, dropped down. These eyes held level as nailed points in space. A voice hissed behind him. What is it? Eli. Thin, shaking. Clint zipped the flap shut so fast the teeth snarled. Just one animal circling, he said, and heard how flat the lie sounded. Just one what? Marv asked. Can't tell. Probably bear. Probably ain't good enough. Clint pressed his palms against his thighs to hide the tremor. It's not inside the tent. Keep it that way? Eli swallowed audibly. Did you see eyes? Yeah. How many? 1 set. Clint met Marv's gaze in the stove glow, daring him to call it. Marv held the look, then glanced away. He knew. For the next hour, Clint sat with the flare gun across his knees and counted the passes by sound. 12 steps along the left arc. Pause. 8 along the rear where drift deepened. Pause. 10 on the right. Like clockwork with small variations. He tried to map it in his head, tried to force pattern into something manageable. At 2:03, the steps retreated into trees for 5 full minutes. Eli started crying silently, shoulders shaking under his sleeping bag, and apologized between breaths. Sorry, I don't know why I... Don't apologize, Marv said quietly. Just keep your gloves on. Clint wanted to key the radio and call somebody, warden, sheriff, whoever monitored emergency channels overnight. But what would he say? We have eyes outside. Something is walking around politely. Send a team to a back lake in the middle of the night because I'm spooked. He heard Tara's voice in his head. Don't borrow trouble. The steps returned before he decided. Near moonset, the dark changed quality, less black, more blue-gray, as the sky thinned toward morning. Their outside fire had slumped to dull coals, casting a low red wash over the snow by the sled. Clint risked another look. This time not through the front flap, but a slit where canvas had gapped near a stake. At first he saw only movement at the edge of vision. Shadow detaching from trees. Then it crossed between the coals and the open ice beyond, and the shape resolved enough to hit him like a shove. Shoulders rose above the snowmobile windshield they'd propped against the sled as a windbreak. Above it, the top line of its back was long, sloping, wrong in proportion, as if two different animals had been stitched, end to end. For 3 steps it moved upright, not fully vertical, but high enough that its forelimbs hung forward, elbows bent. Then in one fluid drop it folded to all fours without losing speed. Marv was at Clint's shoulder now, peering through the same slit. "That a person?" he whispered. "Tell me that's a person in a snowsuit." The figure passed a jack pine near the shoreline. The trunk, which Clint knew was 8 inches thick, looked like a sapling next to it. "No," Clint said before he could stop himself. Eli crawled over and Clint blocked him with an arm. "Don't look." "Why?" "Because I said so." Outside, the shape paused broadside on the pale ice. No details, only mass and line. The head turned toward the tent with a slow, deliberate motion that felt less like curiosity and more like assessment. Then it resumed the ring, each step a muted crush in crusted snow. Clint's mouth had gone dry. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Every practical rule he lived by, identify, assess distance, make a plan, collapsed against one fact. Nothing that size should move that quietly or stand that high or circle for hours without committing. Marv whispered, "We run now?" "In this dark? We break a leg and it's done." Clint swallowed. "We wait for light." "For what? So we can see it better?" "So we can see where we're stepping." Eli made a small strangled sound and buried his face in his sleeves. Clint leaned back from the canvas and shut his eyes for 1 second, forcing air in and out, counting like he did when panic nipped at the edge on thin ice. 1 to 4 in, 1 to 4 hold, 1 to 4 out. He opened his eyes and checked his watch. 3:41. Just a bear, he told himself, and immediately knew the sentence was dead on arrival. Just a man in winter gear, he tried next, some giant local messing with camps for laughs. But men didn't move like poured oil across crust. Men didn't drop from near standing to 4-point gate without a stumble. Men didn't make a jack pine look thin. He gripped the flare gun until his knuckles hurt and stared at the glowing stove seam, repeating the only lie that let him stay functional. It's real enough to survive, not real enough to understand. For a while, nothing changed except the stove ticking and the crunching circle outside. Clint kept counting passes. Numbers steadied him. Numbers meant systems. But by 4 o'clock, the intervals shifted in a way that felt intentional, not random drift around a campsite. It shortened one side of the loop and lengthened another, lingering near the tent flap where their scent was strongest, then gliding off toward the sled and back again. Every few minutes it scraped at the crust with a slow, dragging sound as if testing depth. Eli finally whispered, "I can't do this anymore." "You are doing it," Clint said. "Keep breathing." Marv flexed his right hand in his glove, then looked at his left like it didn't belong to him. "Fingers are going numb." "Get them by the stove. Rotate." Clint didn't look away from the flap. "No one opens anything without saying it first." He tried the handheld radio anyway. He switched channels, adjusted squelch, lifted the unit toward the roof seam, thumbed transmit. "Anybody on emergency monitor, this is camp on East Ridge Lake, requesting contact." Static, a hiss, nothing. He tried again, giving coordinates from memory. Same result. Marv muttered, "Maybe battery, fresh lithium, or terrain, We're on a lake. Could be no one listening at 4 in the damn morning. That, Clint couldn't argue with. He reached for his phone, already knowing what he'd see. One bar flickered, disappeared, returned as a ghost, then dropped to SOS with no carrier name. He held it against the center pole, then near the stove jack, then at the flap. Nothing stable enough to call. He typed a text to Tara anyway, still out. Weird animal, leaving at first light. Love you. It spun unsent, then failed. He did not show the others. Outside, the steps stopped again. Not away in trees. Right there, close enough that Clint could hear breath through canvas. Slow pulls, heavy and wet, followed by a faint whistle as air left scarred passages in the nose or throat. Eli clapped both hands over his own mouth. Clint grabbed the flare gun, thumbed the brake to check the cartridge seated, snapped it shut. If it comes in, we go light and noise, stay together. Noise with what? Marv asked. Pot, shovel, whatever you can swing. Eli glanced toward the lantern hooked low from a line. Should we kill that light? No. Dark helps it, not us. The thing moved again, but now the steps were so near the wall that each one shivered canvas dust from the seams. It passed Clint's side, paused, and Clint heard something new. A soft thump against the outer fabric at knee height, then another higher up, then a slow slide downward, as if long digits were pressing, feeling tension, mapping where bodies sat, Marv mouthed. Digits without sound, eyes wide. Clint nodded once. He didn't trust his voice. A minute later came a metallic clink from outside near the sled, then another, then a drag. Clint risked a slit peek through the stake gap and saw motion by the gear pile, low and dark. One of the bait pails tipped, rolled, and stopped. A rod case shifted 3 inches through snow as something tugged and released. He couldn't see the body, only the effects of it, an invisible hand moving camp pieces around as if sorting. A long strip of canvas shadow passed, then the coals brightened as air moved over them. Eli's whisper cracked. It's in our stuff. Stay put. Another clink. This one he recognized. The hard ring of steel against auger blade guard. It was handling tools. Clint's pulse jumped from fear into anger, sharp and hot. Gear was survival out here. A broken auger was inconvenience. A missing stove fuel bottle could kill. He watched the shadow angle toward the tree line and then back, never fully committing to leave. Testing, taking a measure, coming closer each pass. At 4:19, Eli's boot caught his own sleeping bag and he jerked, trying to shift farther from the wall. His heel hit the lantern stand. The lantern tipped. It hit the ground with a dull clang and rolled, flame guttering sideways. For 1 second, everyone lunged at once, Marv reaching to right it, Eli scrambling backward, Clint grabbing for the glass guard, and Eli's flailing boot kicked it hard. The lantern slammed into the center pole and went out, throwing them into stove glow, half dark. Don't move, Clint snapped. Too late. Outside, the footsteps changed instantly from slow circle to 2 quick impacts straight toward the tent. Clint didn't think. He yanked the flare gun, shoved the flap zipper down in one violent pull, and dove through the opening onto his knees in the snow. Cold hit like a wall. He fired low, aiming not at the shape, but at the ground in front of it. The flare struck crust and erupted in red-white fire, spitting sparks and smoke. In that color, for less than 2 heartbeats, the creature became real. Its head swung toward him, and he saw a blunt, wet snout scarred along the left side, tissue puckered white and shiny as old burned skin. Frost clung to whiskers and stiff beads. One ear was gone, torn to a ragged nub, making the skull lopsided and ancient. Its eyes reflected red, not amber now, and the flesh around them moved with unsettling precision, brows tightening like expression rather than reflex. It stood half-raised, shoulders humped, forelimbs bent, forelimbs that ended in paws too long. 5 digits flexed into the crust one by one, black nails curving, then spreading with a deliberate splay as if testing whether ice would hold his weight. Not paw pads like wolf, not hands like human. Something in between that made Clint's stomach flip. Its fur wasn't a coat so much as layered damage, dark ridges matted together, sections missing, underfur showing in pale scars. Across one flank ran thick white lines like ropes under skin, healed from old tears or trap wire. Breath rolled from its mouth in dense plumes, each exhale carrying that same metallic rot Clint had smelled by the track. It didn't charge. It looked at him, not through him, not past him, at him, head tilted slightly to put one eye forward, as if triangulating and choosing. Behind Clint, Marv shouted, "Get back in!" Clint fired his second flare without aiming. It arced over the creature and burst near the shoreline, painting trees crimson. The thing flinched at the sound, dropped fully to all fours in one fluid motion, and glided sideways out of the brightest light, never turning its back. Clint stumbled into the tent flap, half fell in, and Marv hauled him by the bib straps. "You see it?" Eli was sobbing openly now. "What is it? What is it?" "Big," Clint said. His voice shook so hard the word broke. "Big and wrong." "That narrows it down real nice," Marv snapped, then immediately softened. Sorry. Outside, the circle resumed. Closer. By 4:40, the flare's red stain had faded from the snow, and with it went the one clear look Clint wished he'd never gotten. Every time he blinked, he saw those digits flexing. Testing. The creature began touching the tent more often now. Small presses at random points. Then firm pushes where a person might be if they hadn't shifted. Each time it found empty space, it adjusted, learning layout by elimination. "It knows where we are," Eli whispered. Clint didn't answer because yes. A soft rattle came from the sled again. Then the zipper on an outer duffel made a short, tearing sound. "No," Clint said, and felt ridiculous saying it out loud, like scolding a thief. The rattle stopped. 2 beats later, something bumped the tent wall and dropped with a thud just outside. Clint unzipped an inch and reached out blindly with the shovel handle. He hooked fabric and pulled an object in. His own red knit hat slid across the floor, the one Tara had handed him at the mudroom door. For a second he just stared at it, wet and crusted with snow. Marv saw his face. "What?" Clint held up the hat. "How'd that get out there?" Eli asked. Clint pointed to the gear pile. "I had it stuffed in top pocket of the green duffel, zipped." No one spoke. A minute later came another drop against the wall. This time it was Clint's thermos, dented, lid unscrewed, coffee frozen in a brown fan across the snow. Then one glove, not torn, removed. The message was too clear to miss. "I can reach what is yours. I can touch what you need. I can do it whenever I want." Marv leaned close, voice low and furious with fear. "It's playing with us." "Yeah. Predators don't play." "Some do. Not like this." Clint forced himself to think in procedures. "Inventory. Say what you have on you now." Marv blinked. "What?" "Do it." They patted down pockets and called items. Lighter, knife, 2 hand warmers, 1 radio, 1 spare battery pack, paracord, whistle, headlamp, gloves. Eli had lost 1 mitten in the lantern scramble. Clint gave him a backup pair from his chest pocket. When Eli tried to laugh, it came out a hiccup. "We sound like Boy Scouts." "Boy Scouts live," Clint said. He tried the radio again and got 3 seconds of voice so faint it might have been imagination. A distant male tone clipped by static. He transmitted fast, loud enough that the thing outside would hear every word. "Emergency traffic. 3 campers on East Ridge Lake being circled by large aggressive predator. Request immediate response." Static surged, then the signal died. Outside, the footsteps halted right at the flap. Clint's skin crawled. It had reacted to his voice. He switched tactics and yelled through canvas, "Hey, get out of here!" The answer was a low chuff directly at face level, warm vapor pushing through zipper teeth. Eli retched into an empty bait cup. Marv whispered, "Don't talk to it." Clint nodded slowly. Another pattern. When Clint made noise, it closed distance. When Marv banged a pot, it shifted but didn't commit. When Eli cried, it paused and listened. It was sorting stimuli. Clint realized with cold certainty that this hadn't started tonight. The parallel prints by the trail. Boon refusing to leave the truck. The paced footsteps, matching him in timber. The absent wildlife. This thing had been in his margins for days, maybe weeks, watching him move roots and habits, learning that he checked weather, staked trails, trusted routine. Predators found the seam in routine and waited there. A scratching noise climbed the canvas near the stove jack, nails or claws catching thread. The wall bowed inward 6 inches, held, then relaxed. Again, lower. Again. "Pole's going," Marv said. "Brace it." They both shoved against center support while Eli fed the stove too fast, hands shaking, smoke coughing into the tent until Clint swore and adjusted draft. Another impact. Not full body, but heavy enough to jar the frame. Then another on the opposite side. It was no longer circling evenly. It was narrowing arcs, striking points, finding weakness. At 5:02, something seized the guy line outside and pulled. The tent wall snapped taut, then jerked sideways. Snow sifted down the seam. Marv shouted, "It's on the line!" Clint slashed at the inner tie to release tension before the pole cracked. The side sagged, dumping frost onto Eli's shoulders. They dragged sleeping bags and stove a foot towards center to keep clear of collapse zones. "Plan?" Marv said through clenched teeth. "Give me a plan right now." "First blue light, we move for markers," Clint said. "Single file, tight spacing, no one runs." "How far?" 2 miles to truck if we hold line." "If we hold line?" Marv repeated. Eli stared at the floor. "It can just knock me down." "Not if we stay linked." Clint pulled paracord, looped it through belt loops. Clint, Marv, Eli. "If one falls, I'll stop. No hero stuff." Eli nodded too quickly. Okay. Outside, a new sound emerged from the dark, a rhythmic crunch not circling now, but ahead and to their right, near the route back to the trail stakes. It moved there, stopped, moved again, as if occupying the lane they'd have to use. "It's on the trail," Clint said. "How do you know?" "I know." Time stretched thin between 5:10 and dawn. They packed with mittens on and lights off, using touch memory. Stove cooled enough to move, fuel cap tight, medkit accessible, flares, one left, knife where Clint could draw it, spare socks abandoned, fish gear abandoned, anything not essential left in a pile. Every dropped second felt stolen. The game camera SD card mattered suddenly. Proof mattered. Clint crawled to the collapsed side and reached under a sagging flap to where the pine stood. His hand met empty bark. The strap hung cut clean, end frayed but not chewed. Camera gone. He pulled back, breath shallow. Camera's missing. Marv looked up. You sure? Strap's there, unit's gone. Could have fallen. Could have? Clint didn't believe that either. At 5:23, they heard movement farther out, fast for the first time. A burst of impacts running from shoreline to ridge and back, then silence. The sudden speed was worse than the circling. It meant capacity. Eli whispered, "It can sprint." "Everything can sprint," Marv lied. Clint checked the flap seam. A faint wash of color had begun outside, not sunrise yet, just the world going from black to charcoal. Enough soon to navigate stakes if weather held. Wind had eased. Good. Good was relative. He unlooped the paracord from belts and retied it with slack between each man for stride. Marv tested knot strength with numb fingers. Eli kept swallowing like he couldn't get enough air. Clint tried his phone one last time, held high. One bar appeared. He hit call on Tara before it vanished. The call rang once, an impossible, beautiful tone, then dropped dead. He stared at the blank screen, jaw tight, and shoved it inside his coat. Outside, the creature moved to the left side of camp and began a slow, deliberate approach. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Not circling now, closing straight. Clint raised a hand for silence and watched the lower seam darken as its bulk eclipsed dawn light. Breath steamed through a pinhole in the canvas like a little engine. A long digit traced downward, splitting frost from fabric in a clean line. Then, from 20 yards off near the old coals, came another crunch, and another. The sound came staggered off the ice and ridge, a second cadence that chased the first by a beat, then vanished when the near steps paused. Eli looked at him, eyes huge. "It sounds like two." Clint listened hard. One cadence at the wall, a trailing echo farther out, arriving late and wrong whenever it shifted lanes. "Could be echo," Marv said, and this time he clung to it. The near shape drifted away from the wall and slid toward the entrance, positioning between them and open lake. A moment later, the same cadence seemed to answer from shoreline side, as if it had looped fast or bounced off the basin. Cutting that lane too, Clint felt the geometry lock into place around them. Tent at center, ridge behind, pressure crack to the left, blocked trail ahead, trees to the right. Every easy exit covered by either terrain or movement. He saw with a clarity that stripped panic down to bone exactly how little space they had left. No radio contact, no phone, one flare, one half-collapsed tent. Two men and a teenager tied together by a cord and fear. Whatever was out there had had all night to map them. And now dawn was giving it the light it needed to finish deciding. Marv whispered, "Tell me where to go." Clint looked at the sagging canvas, at Eli's shaking hands, at the dark shape shifting beyond the seam, and understood there was no good route left, only choices between bad and worse. He tightened his grip on the flare gun and said, "When I open this, we move together. Do not stop. Do not split. No matter what you hear." Outside, footsteps crossed directly in front of the flap and halted. There was nowhere left to run. Clint didn't wait for courage. He unzipped the flap and hit it with his shoulder, forcing the sagging canvas outward into the blue-black dawn. Cold flooded in, hard enough to sting his teeth. Marv and Eli came behind him on the cord, hunched and stumbling, boots catching collapsed fabric. The last stars were fading. Light had just begun to lift off the lake, that thin pre-dawn color that flattened distance and made everything look farther away than it was. The thing stood 30 feet out. For the first time, Clint saw all of it. It was bigger than his mind had let him accept in pieces. 7 feet or better when it rose, though it didn't hold that posture long. It towered for a breath, spine arched high like a hyena, and shoulders built as heavy as a small black bear's, then poured down to all fours in one motion so smooth it looked jointless. Its torso ran long, too long with a dip at the midsection, and thick hindquarters, coiled like springs. The back legs were wrong for a true canine, long from hock to pad, over-muscled, giving it a crouched, loaded look even when still. Its head carried a scarred, blunt muzzle with enough length to be wolf-like, but the set of the eyes and the movement around them were almost readable in a human way. Focused, evaluating, irritated. Frost rhymed its whiskers and the torn edge where one ear should have been. The other ear stood narrow and ragged, twitching once toward them, then toward the ridge. Old scars striped both flanks in pale, cable-thick lines under dark matted fur that clumped in ridges. Not a clean winter coat. One shoulder looked badly healed, as if it had been crushed years ago and grown around the damage. Its forelimbs ended in those same hand-like paws Clint had seen in the flare light. 5 elongated digits, black nails, flexible spread. It pressed one to the crust, flexed, and lifted without sinking, testing, learning load. No wasted motion, no bluffing. It looked like every hard winter thing in the UP had been forced into one body and then left out too long. Eli made a broken sound behind Clint, halfway between a sob and a scream. The thing's head snapped to him immediately. "Move," Clint said. His voice came out as a rasp. "Markers, right side, go." They started, 3 bodies tied by cord, and the creature flowed sideways with them, matching angle, not closing yet. Hurting. Every time Eli drifted left toward open ice, it stepped into that lane and pushed him back toward camp line with a subtle shift of shoulder. Not attacking, steering. That scared Clint worse than a charge. They made maybe 15 yards before Eli's fear finally outran thought. The kid yanked hard against the cord and bolted toward the nearest dark shape he recognized. The auger holes and sled scatter where they'd fished the night before, dragging Clint half sideways. "No!" Clint shouted. "Eli, back!" The cord jerked from Clint's glove, burned his palm, and went slack as Eli tore free of the belt loop knot. The creature exploded forward. It didn't leap for Eli's back or throat. It angled ahead of him, cut across his path, and rose high enough that Eli skidded to a stop and fell backward in the snow with both hands up like he could ward it off. The animal dropped in front of him broadside, forcing him to pivot away from open lake and back toward the men. Hurting again. Deliberate. Clint's last flare was already in his hand. He snapped the gun up, aimed at the snow directly between Eli and the thing, and fired. The flare punched crust and detonated in a violent burst of white-red sparks at the creature's feet. It flinched. Not from pain, Clint thought, but from the sudden assault of light and heat under its nose. It threw its head back and opened its jaws in a wide, silent gape. No bark, no roar, no growl Clint could hear. Just pink-gray scar tissue inside the mouth, heavy teeth, strings of vapor, and silence so total it felt like his ears had blown out. "Marv, grab him!" Clint yelled. Marv lunged, caught Eli by the back of his bib collar, and hauled him through the crust in 2 violent jerks. Eli kicked and cried out. One boot lost to drift, then found his feet and stumbled toward Clint. The creature recovered in a heartbeat and started in again, lower now, shoulder rolling, head level with Clint's waist. Clint had no flare left. He dropped the empty launcher and looked for anything loud, hot, bright. Anything that made him bigger than prey. His eyes hit the sled. The chainsaw was still lashed to the side, bar wrapped in a cracked orange scabbard. There because he always carried it in case a blowdown blocked the trail in. He sprinted 3 steps, ripped the saw free, thumbed choke off by feel, and yanked the pull cord. Nothing. He yanked again. The engine coughed once and died. The creature slowed, watching his hands. "Come on," Clint hissed, yanked a 3rd time, and the saw caught with a hard metallic bark that ripped across the lake. He didn't throttle into cut, just revved it high and swung it in broad arcs in front of him, chain-spinning air, exhaust punching blue smoke into the cold. The vibration tore through his blistering palms. Heat from the housing bit bare skin where his glove had twisted off. The animal checked up. One forepaw lifted, digits flexing. Ear and ragged nub flattened. It shifted weight back 2 inches. Clint revved harder and advanced 1 step. "Back up," he shouted over the engine. "Both of you now!" Marv had Eli by the harness loop and was dragging him backward toward the first orange trail marker stake. Eli was sobbing, I'm sorry, over and over. "Shut up and walk," Marv snapped, voice cracking. "Just walk." Clint kept the saw between himself and the creature, sweeping left, right, left, never turning his back, backing in measured steps. Every few yards the animal tried to angle around his right flank, toward Eli. Clint cut it off with noise and movement, throwing spray from the chain into its face. It snapped once, not a full bite, more a warning clack of teeth in empty air, and retreated half a body length. They passed the first marker, then the second. Dawn widened. Trees on the shore sharpened from smudges to trunks. The pressure ridge ahead rose in a broken line of white slabs and wind-hardened drifts, their path threading through a low notch Clint had staked the day before. At the ridge, the creature made its only true charge. It came low and fast from Clint's left, using the ridge shadow, a dark blur over crust. Clint pivoted, nearly fell, and shoved the saw out, two-handed like a shield. The chain clipped ice and spat shards. The engine screamed. The animal veered at the last instant so close Clint felt the air of it, and caught a blast of carrion metal breath. One long digit raked his sleeve, slicing outer fabric but missing skin. Then it was past him, cutting toward Eli again. "Marv," Clint bellowed. Marv didn't hesitate. He planted, yanked Eli backward by the collar so hard Eli's feet left the ground, and both of them went down in a heap behind a ridge chunk. Clint stepped into the lane and revved the saw at full throttle until the chain blurred silver. The animal stopped 10 feet away and rose. In full blue morning light, upright, it was unmistakably enormous. Head above Clint's by nearly a foot, shoulders wider than his chest fur hanging in wet clumps over thick scar-crossed muscle. It looked at the spinning chain, then at Clint, eyes narrowing as if annoyed by a tool in the way of an equation. Again that silent gape, jaws opening without sound. Then, with a whip-fast twist, it dropped to all fours and shot up and over the pressure ridge in 3 bounds, dark body folding and extending with terrifying efficiency. Snow dust exploded behind it. It hit the far side and accelerated across the broken ice, faster than Clint's eyes could hold. Gone from near to distant in seconds, angling toward the tree line without a backward glance. For a moment Clint thought it had left. Then he heard it again, farther out in parallel. Crunch, 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 shadowing their route from the woods. "Keep moving," he said. His throat felt scraped raw. "Do not stop." They moved. For 2 miles they half walked, half ran in insulated bibs, tripping through drifts and over marker stakes. Clint leading with the idling saw until the tank ran low, then blipping throttle whenever the distant footsteps drifted closer. When the engine finally sputtered dry, Marv took over noise with a shovel against the auger guard, steady metal-on-metal clanging that made Eli flinch every strike but kept the rhythm of "we are still here" in front of them. The shadow pace stayed with them for almost an hour, always off to one side, never fully disappearing until the trail narrowed near the access road and the first shape of Clint's truck came into view through spruce trunks. Only then did the footsteps stop. Clint got Eli into the passenger seat first, because the kid's knees kept buckling. Marv climbed in after, clumsy with his left hand, face pale beneath his beard. Clint threw the chainsaw in the bed, slammed the tailgate, and got behind the wheel with hands that didn't seem attached to him. He locked the doors before starting the engine, then checked them again. "Seatbelts," he said. Neither moved. "Seatbelts," he barked. They clicked in by reflex. As soon as the heater fan came on, Eli started crying harder, the kind of shaking cry that makes no sound for whole stretches and then spills out all at once. Marv stared straight ahead, breathing through his nose in short bursts. Clint pulled onto the road, fish-tailed, corrected, and drove too fast for conditions until his vision tunneled, and he forced himself to back off. Every dark stand of trees beside the road looked like cover for something keeping pace. He checked mirrors constantly. Nothing there. Then again, still nothing. At the first stretch, with one bar of signal, he called Tara. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep and immediate fear. "Clint, are you okay?" "I got one missed call at 5-something and then—" "We're alive," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "We're heading south. Need urgent care. Marv's hand's bad. Eli's in shock." "What happened?" "Not on the phone." He swallowed. "Can you meet us in Escanaba?" A beat. "Yes, I'm leaving now." He hung up before she could ask more because he didn't have language yet that wouldn't sound insane. By the time they reached urgent care in Escanaba, his palms had blistered where skin had stuck and peeled against hot saw housing. Eli had a shallow laceration on his shin from a broken tent pole and early hypothermia symptoms. Uncontrollable shivering, confusion, vomiting dry. Marv's left hand was white-waxed at the fingertips and mottled over the knuckles from cold exposure, where his glove had soaked through during the ridge fall. The triage nurse took one look at the three of them and skipped paperwork. In the treatment bay, under fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic, their story shrank into acceptable pieces. "Exposure overnight?" the nurse asked, clipping a pulse ox on Eli. "Yes," Clint said. "Any substances?" "No." "Any animal attack?" Clint looked at Marv. Marv looked at the floor. "Encounter?" Clint said finally. "Large predator. We evacuated." The nurse paused, pen hovering, then wrote something and moved on. Tara arrived while a PA was rewarming Marv's hand in circulating water and talking about not rubbing frost-nipped tissue. She crossed the room in 3 steps and put both hands on Clint's face like she was verifying he was solid. "You're bleeding," she said. "Just cuts. You're shaking. So are you." She laughed once, a sharp, tiny sound, and then hugged him so hard his bruised ribs hurt. He let her. Over her shoulder, he watched Eli on the next bed staring at the ceiling like it might open. They discharged just after noon with instructions for hydration, rest, and monitoring for delayed cold injury. "No driving if you're sleep-deprived," the PA said, and Clint nodded while knowing he wouldn't sleep for a long time. He didn't sleep that night, or the next. At home, he sat at the kitchen table with his coat still on, lights on in every room, and listened for footsteps that never came. Boon would not leave his side. 40 hours later, with his hands bandaged and his mind grinding, Clint drove to the local conservation office. He had replayed the report in his head all night. What to include, what to cut, what would create a record without ending with someone deciding he was unstable. A young officer in a green uniform met him in a small office that smelled like wet wool and copier toner. Nameplate, Officer Jensen. "What can I do for you?" Jensen asked, opening a form on his tablet. Clint sat stiffly. "Need to report aggressive wildlife behavior on East Ridge Lake. Overnight camp. 3 people present." "Anyone injured by animal contact?" "No bites, no confirmed strike. We had hypothermia and minor injuries during withdrawal." Jensen nodded. "Species?" Clint held his gaze. "Unidentified large predator." Jensen's eyebrows ticked up a fraction. "Describe." "Dark coat, bigger than local wolf. Moved on 4, occasionally reared. Circled camp for hours. Approached repeatedly. Interfered with gear." "Interfered how?" "Moved items. Pressured us when we tried to leave. Shadowed us to trailhead." Jensen typed for a while. "Any photos?" "Camera went missing. Tracks?" "Wind wiped most before daylight. We were focused on getting out." Jensen leaned back. "Could be wolves, especially if food conditioned around camps. Stress can make behavior feel targeted." "Stress can make behavior feel targeted." Clint tasted metal in his mouth and kept his face flat. "Maybe." "Any chance of misidentification? Darkness, fatigue, fear response?" "Always a chance," Clint said, still filing it. Jensen nodded, perhaps relieved. "That's fair. I'll log it as unusual predator interaction and alert district staff to check the area. In the future, larger group, multiple tents, bear deterrent spray even in winter, and avoid leaving bait unsecured." Clint almost laughed at avoid leaving bait unsecured and didn't. He signed with a stiff hand and stood. At the door, Jensen said, "You did the right thing coming in." Clint gave a small, non-committal nod and left with the paper copy folded in his pocket like a talisman and an insult at once. He had not mentioned upright gait details. He had not mentioned the hand-like pause. He had not said silent gape. He had not said that it herded an 18-year-old like livestock. He gave them enough truth for a map pin and not enough to lose the room. Marv never filed anything. When Clint called that evening, Marv answered, listened to 10 seconds of small talk, and said, "I'm not discussing that night with anyone," then hung up. Eli's mother called once to ask if there would be some kind of official statement for insurance because of Eli's treatment bill. Clint said he had filed a report. She thanked him in a voice that sounded exhausted and scared, then asked very quietly, "Do I let him camp again?" Clint had no answer she could use. By spring breakup, Clint had turned down 2 night logging contracts. His foreman cornered him by the fuel shed, hard hat tilted back. "You're walking away from premium shift differential over 1 bad trip?" "It's not 1 trip." "Then what is it?" Clint looked out past stacked pulpwood to the dark line of spruce. "I'm done being deep in at night," Foreman snorted. You going soft on me, Caldwell? Call it what you want. Within 3 months, he took a day shift at a sawmill in Marquette. Lower pay, predictable hours, loud enough that his own thoughts couldn't corner him. He hated the fluorescent hum and loved the parking lot full of people. He could see 3 exits from his station. He memorized all of them the first week. He sold his portable ice shack in April to a guy from Gladstone who talked cheerfully about overnighters and pike spearing. Clint helped load it, took cash, and stood in his driveway too long after tail lights vanished. He kept only shore fishing gear after that. No sled, no overnight stove kit, no canvas tent. At home, he installed motion lights on all 4 sides of the house, then trail cameras covering the driveway porch and tree line, then steel hasps and latch guards on every exterior door. Tara came home one afternoon to find him replacing short hinge screws with 3-inch deck screws that bit deep into framing studs. "Are we expecting a prison break?" she asked, dropping her school bag. "Longer screws hold better?" "From what?" "From anything." She watched him for a long second. "Clint." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." That night she woke to him swinging at the dark after a dream and catching the headboard with his fist hard enough to split skin. He sat on the edge of the bed shaking, whispering, "I thought it was the tent." Like a confession. The next morning, over untouched coffee, she said, "I love you. I am not leaving. But this," she gestured between them, at the house, at his red-rimmed eyes, "it's bigger than white-knuckling it." "I'm fine. You're not sleeping." "I sleep." "You patrol windows at 2 a.m. with a flashlight, and Boon growls at you because he thinks you're an intruder." He looked away. She slid a business card across the table. "Counselor in Marquette. Trauma and first responders. You go or I go stay with my sister until you decide if you actually want a life with me in it." He picked up the card and turned it over twice. "That's an ultimatum. That's a boundary." He went. In counseling, he learned words he hated at first: hypervigilance, trigger stacking, conditioned threat response. He learned to sleep with curtains cracked open 1 inch, then 3. He learned to identify the difference between memory and present danger by naming 5 visible objects in a room when panic spiked. Some nights it worked. Some nights it didn't. Marv stopped answering most calls. At the mill one Saturday, they crossed paths at the hardware store, both men in aisle 7 pretending to compare chainsaw oil. Clint said, "You doing okay?" Marv said, without looking up, "I don't camp anymore," put the bottle in his cart, and walked away. Eli finished the semester barely. Then he transferred schools and moved downstate with an uncle. 2 years passed with nothing but silence and one text that arrived at 1:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. "I still hear it walking." Clint stared at the message until the screen dimmed. He typed 3 replies and deleted all of them. Finally, he sent, "Keep lights on, don't isolate. Call if you need." Eli never answered. Clint and Tara postponed their wedding once. No fight, just paperwork moved and venue deposit refunded. A year later, they did it at the courthouse in Marquette with 2 witnesses and no honeymoon in the woods. After the judge pronounced them married, Tara squeezed his hand and said, "We can go to Chicago for a weekend, like normal people." Clint said, "Indoor hotel?" She grinned. "With locks." Now when people ask what he does, Clint says, "Sawmill weekdays, youth hockey weekends." The rink in Munising smells like sharpened ice and wet gloves. Kids crash into boards and pop up laughing. Clint runs drills. ties skates for little ones with numb fingers, and keeps his voice steady. Predictable, boring, safe. He likes that word now in a way his younger self would have mocked. On storm nights, he checks weather apps on 3 platforms and keeps a backup generator tested monthly. He has mapped exit routes from his house, from the rink, from Tara's school. He keeps emergency blankets in both vehicles and a med kit in the mudroom. Control, layered and practical, is how he breathes. His one hard rule with friends and younger guys from the mill is simple. No one overnights winter backcountry with a single tent anymore. If they laugh, he doesn't argue. He just says, "Then don't call me when things get weird." Sometimes late, when wind drags snow across the siding and little ticking sounds, he still sits up and listens until Boon lifts his head, confirms nothing is there, and settles again. The terror is less sharp now, more like an old fracture that aches in certain weather. He tells the story rarely. When he does, it is never at bars and never for entertainment. Usually it's when someone says, "Come on, what are the odds?" while packing for a winter trip. He gives them the facts first. Route markers, extra light, communication redundancy, never split, keep noise options that don't rely on batteries, know where your nearest warm care is and how far in miles, not minutes. Then, if they're still listening and not smirking, he tells them about the footsteps that made a ring around a tent from dusk to dawn, and the shape that learned where fear lived, inside 3 men. He is certain now that the dead bite and those sonar bait clouds, dropping and scattering, were not random conditions. They were the first confirmed warning indicator of the same pressure moving through that lake. He is certain now that the moose trail ending clean on the ridge was not weather or bad tracking. It was a second confirmed warning indicator that normal movement had been interrupted by that same threat. And he is certain now that the woods-wide silence, the missing birds, coyotes, and routine sign, was the clearest confirmed warning indicator of all. He doesn't offer a name for it because he doesn't have one. He filed what he could. He changed what he had to. He built a life where darkness has more walls and fewer unknown miles, and on certain brittle mornings, before sunrise, with coffee steaming in his hand and the weather radio muttering warnings in the kitchen, he still thinks about a lake gone silent and a creature standing in blue light at 30 feet, opening its mouth without a sound before vanishing over a pressure ridge. Not proof, not legend, just warning.